Hello, fifth graders, and welcome to our language arts lesson for today. We're going to be continuing reading, but just like last time, I'm going to walk us through answers to the homework questions and clarify maybe some questions that you have. So, I'm going to come bring you down here and flip you around. All right. So remember, question 1 asks us, provide one quote from pages 12 through 13 that shows how the narrator describes Enkidu. Remember, okay, we would say one quote from pages 12 through 13 that shows how the narrator describes Enkidu is blank. There's a lot of quotes you could have selected. I saw a lot of ones. So you could say that he was shaggy and rough, that he had a pelt of matted hair, that he had a bark brown face. Maybe he had nut brown eyes. That the animals were friends. Well, actually, that one's not a quote, so that wouldn't be a good one. So these are all kinds of quotes that describe a little bit about Enkidu, and we see that he's a very kind of earthy creature, right? He's made from the earth, and his appearance reflects that. Okay. Question 2, why did the animals flee from Enkidu? This is actually a direct quote from the text. The animals flee from Enkidu because he smelled of, quote, perfume and sweet oil and wine. 3, why does Enkidu flare into a rage? The second choice, Enkidu flares into a rage when he hears how Gilgamesh has treated his people. What was Gilgamesh contemplating? This is on page 17. The narrator tells us directly, King Gilgamesh was contemplating marriage. Number 5, I really hinted at this when I was reading with you guys yesterday, but what foreshadowing was fulfilled at the end of the chapter? We would say the foreshadowing that was fulfilled at the end of the chapter is that Gilgamesh got a friend, or something along those lines. I said this repeatedly in the form, but remember, fifth graders, even if the form tells you you got something wrong in a short answer, I'm reading the answers, so I'm going to see how you did, so you don't have to stress if it marked you wrong and you're thinking, wait a second, I know I got this right. I'm going in and reading your answers and adjusting, so don't get stressed about that. And then you have 2 choices for ebbed. Remember that ebbed is to get less or to decrease, to decline, to become smaller. So he collapsed to the ground in exhaustion as his strength ebbed is the correct choice because his strength got smaller, declined, decreased, and so he collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. All right, so fifth graders, quickly taking a look at our objective for today. Our objective is going to be considering Gilgamesh and hubris. So we want to remember this definition of hubris. When we're talking about hubris, this is our excessive pride. And we talked about maybe someone overestimates their abilities. Maybe they think too highly of themselves. They think they're better than everyone else. Or they think they're invincible, okay? So we're going to consider Gilgamesh and hubris, and we're saying maybe hubris because remember that second part of hubris is that it has to come with some kind of a downfall. And we're not necessarily going to know at this point in the story if Gilgamesh will have a downfall, but we want to start considering, might this be possible? Okay. And one of our questions is going to relate directly to this objective. So I'm going to go through today's questions with you, but before we do that, you want to get your materials to get ready. So you will need your copy of Gilgamesh. You might want notebook and paper and a pencil. As we're considering these last 2 options, fifth graders, I would ask yourself, how have the last 2 days gone? Have you used these and found them really helpful? If so, I'd keep doing it. If you are taking notes as you're reading so that you're ready to answer the questions in the form, that's a great idea. Have you not used these and it hasn't been going very well? If you haven't been using these and it's really been kind of a struggle for you to do the homework, then I would encourage you to start trying to use these as a resource. Okay, and maybe you haven't used them and it's been fine, and that's okay too. But I want you guys just to consider, how has the homework been going and should you be trying a new strategy? So if you need to pause to get these things, do so, and then come on back. So before we get into our reading, I want to take a look at our questions for today. I'm going to keep reiterating. This is probably, by the way, the last day that I keep telling you in your directions that you want to make sure you're answering the questions, and that when you're doing short answer, you must use as many words from the question in your answer as possible. A lot of you guys, as I've given you that feedback in the last couple of days, have been making that change, which is great, but some of you are still really struggling to remember that step. So I think today is going to be the last day that I'm just going to comment on it. So that means starting on Monday, I'm really going to return the work and ask you to fix it. So just, it's a great time to really make sure you're getting that in practice. Okay, so to look at our questions. Who is Huwawa? So Huwawa is who Gilgamesh intends to marry. Huwawa is a monster who protects the cedar forest and who causes one's strength to ebb away, or Huwawa is the usher who criticizes and complains about Gilgamesh. Question 2, what does Gilgamesh say is the purpose of living? Remember, your answer would be Gilgamesh says that the purpose of living is blank. Question 3, what did the elders tell Gilgamesh? And how did Gilgamesh respond to the elders? Question 5 relates directly to our objective. Select one quote from the chapter that might reveal hubris in Gilgamesh. Okay, so we would set it up by saying one quote from the chapter that might reveal hubris in Gilgamesh is, and then you want to quote, which remember, that means the author's exact words. And then number 6, I've changed it up a little bit. I'm asking you to write a vocabulary sentence following my expectations using this word candidly. Candidly means honestly, okay, and it's or openly, and it's defined in your instructions as well. So remember that if you are writing a vocabulary sentence, it needs to be at least 6 words long, capital letter and end mark, and you want to show me that you understand the definition of the word. So don't just say candidly starts with C. Candidly is in the dictionary. It's honestly not even enough to say the people spoke to each other candidly, because that still doesn't really give me enough information. So you want to really show me that you understand the definition of this word. A lot of you guys in your earlier assignments have done an outstanding job with vocabulary sentences, so I'm really looking forward to seeing even more outstanding work from you all, okay? So 5th graders, at this point, we're gonna get settled in to start reading together. I've said, and I'll keep saying, that my expectation of you is that as I am reading, your eyes are on the page. That is what helps you to become a better reader. So you really need to make sure that you're following along with me as you go. When I stop to talk, you can, of course, look up and look at me as I'm speaking. But when I'm reading, I want you to be tracking along with me. Remember also, yes, go ahead and pause. If you hear the answer to a question, you want to write it down or add it to the form, you can pause and do that as you go. You don't have to wait to the end. You can kind of complete the form as we are reading, okay? So, chapter 3 on page 20, do or die. If you didn't notice, the last words of the last chapter ended with that they hugged each other with the passion of new friends who know that they will stick together through thick and thin, come what may, do or die. And so then we start the next chapter, do or die. Like the axe in his dream, Gilgamesh wore Enkidu at his side and swore never to be parted from him. I must have been mad to contemplate marriage, he told Enkidu, especially to Ishtar. Remember the last chapter, they hinted that although Ishtar is the goddess of love, she's also described as terrible. Okay, so there are things about Ishtar that are not desirable. Gilgamesh schooled Enkidu in the ways of civilization, and then Enkidu taught him the way of the wild places, how the honey ant gathers its winter food, how mistletoe grows without a root, how water can be mined out of the driest desert. They wrestled and raced and hunted and talked, and the people of Uruk breathed a sigh of relief and gave thanks to the gods. So remember in previous chapters that they've been complaining about how exhausted they've been because of how Gilgamesh pushes them. But now that Gilgamesh has Enkidu, the two of them are kind of spending time together, going on adventures, and the people are all getting a break. So they're breathing this sigh of relief to not have to be working as hard. Enkidu had roamed far afield into the wildest places. He had seen things which Gilgamesh had never seen. He had swum in both the Tigris and the Euphrates. 5th graders, this should be a connection you're making for your history, right? The Fertile Crescent surrounded by the Tigris and Euphrates. And so this was where it's taking place, is the same place that some of the history you're learning is taking place. Had stood on the summit of Mount Nisr where the ark ran aground after the great flood. Had seen the monstrous Huwawa, protector of the cedar forests, and the scorpion men who guard the roadway to the garden of the gods. One day, as Gilgamesh showed Enkidu the sights of the city, He pointed out the carved stone friezes recording the deeds of Uruk's great men. So these friezes would be carvings that are put into the wall and they kind of come out. And so you can kind of see these stories of heroes that have been carved into the walls of the city. Where are the deeds of Gilgamesh? Asked Enkidu. Here, cried Gilgamesh, spread eagling himself against the wall. This blank. So far, I've done nothing worth carving in stone. But soon, Enkidu, soon. You and I are going on such an adventure that no wall will be large enough to record it. We are? Enkidu, too, flattened himself against the wall, striking a grand pose. Where? When? Now? The very ends of his long hair crackled with energy. It was you who gave me the idea. Who's the most frightening foe in the whole world? Enkidu racked his brains. Gilgamesh is. Ask his enemies. Gilgamesh laughed. Someone far more dangerous. We are going to fight Huwawa, guardian of the cedar forest, and kill him, and bring home cedar wood to build new gates for Uruk. Enkidu stepped away from the wall. Now listen, you're forgetting. I've seen Huwawa. He's a monster among monsters. The trees are small alongside him. His strength is the stuff of legends. He never sleeps. When a fox stamps its paw 60 leagues away, Huwawa hears it. He lives for battle. He was made for no other purpose than to guard the forest. No one goes there for fear of him. Besides, a kind of magic surrounds him. You can't go close without your strength ebbing away. That vocabulary word again, ebbing, getting smaller. If you had seen Huwawa, I would have killed him already, declared Gilgamesh. We have to make our mark, don't we? What are you afraid of? Of getting killed, said Enkidu candidly. So remember, fifth graders, that our objective is considering Gilgamesh and hubris. Remember, hubris being this overestimating of one's abilities, or thinking that you're invincible, or thinking you're superior to others. I have already noticed a couple of quotes that I could select that might show hubris in Gilgamesh. So if you haven't noticed any quotes yet, I would really maybe think about rereading those pages or really paying attention moving forward, because there will be some more too. Gilgamesh spread his arms high above his head as if reaching up to clutch the hem of the gods. Then we'll have died gloriously, won't we? And our names will be written in clouds of glory on the noonday sky. Fame is everything, Enkidu, isn't it? Why live if not to make a mark on the world? To blaze a trail through it, to do deeds worthy of remembrance. Do or die. Both his fists were clenched, his feet set square onto life like a prize fighter. A surge of love and pride thrilled through Enkidu. Do or die, he cried, and closed his own hand around the king's upraised fist. Just do me one favor. The cedar forest belongs to Shamash, the sun. Don't fly in the face of the gods. Tell Shamash what you want to do. Ask his blessing. That is how Gilgamesh came to be standing at high noon in the full glare of the sun. A white kid, this means like a baby goat, not a human kid, a baby goat. A white kid at his feet, and in his right hand a silver scepter which caught the sunbeams as he spoke. O sun, O Lord and Master who sees all, only help me to do this thing, and I shall build you a temple all of cedar wood, wood from your own forests. O sun, you who are robed in fiery splendor, surely you understand a man's need to cloak himself in glory. Swaying as he prayed, Gilgamesh felt the tears on his cheeks dry the streaks of white salt. Then it was as if a red-hot hand rested on the crown of his head. Shamash had given his blessing. Crowds of curious onlookers had gathered, round-eyed and fearful, wondering. People of Uruk, cried Gilgamesh, I go to the forest of cedar trees to cut cedar for new city gates and a temple to the god Shamash. There I shall do battle with Huwawa, the evil one. Pray for me and make offerings to the sun. I shall bring back such glory to Uruk that the name of Uruk will live forever in the annals of the world. The crowd gave a nervous laugh and burst out singing. A clumsy, shuffling dance carried them home to their houses. So, this is kind of the narrator's hint that Gilgamesh makes this grand declaration about how he's going to bring glory to Uruk. And you sort of imagine that everyone will be excited, but they're not excited. There's nervousness, and they kind of are cheering, but kind of uncomfortable, kind of dancing, and they all kind of head home. So, this is a hint to us fifth graders that although Gilgamesh feels very confident about this, everyone else has some level of nervousness about his ability to accomplish this task. Gilgamesh and Enkidu went to the forges and gave orders for 2 axes and 2 swords. Armorers and craftsmen went out into the ancient groves and cut willow and boxwood for axe handles and spear shafts. But they sent to Anshan in Persia for wood fine enough to make the king's bow. The axe of Gilgamesh was called Might of Heroes, his bow Anshan. Every stage of the craftsmanship was watched over by Gilgamesh and Enkidu, for they knew that their lives would depend on these weapons. As the golden sparks flew up from the anvil, the elderly counselors of Uruk gathered in the doorway of the forge. Hopefully, you're hearing that elder, and it's cueing to you that you've got a couple questions coming up. That word elder has occurred in the book. Their old heads were white with the snow of wisdom. You are young, Gilgamesh. Youth is rash. If you are rash, it means you're kind of making reckless choices. So they're telling him youth makes you reckless. We beg you to reconsider. This Huwawa is a thing of spirit and magic, invincible. They're asking Gilgamesh to use prudence at this point. But Gilgamesh only laughed. What do you want me to do, gentlemen? Sit at home for 60 years? Wrap up warm in winter and keep cool in the summer and stay safe here in Uruk? The blacksmith passed a finished sword into his outstretched hands. It weighed as much as a grown man, but he handled it as delicately as a newborn baby. The counselors shook their wise old heads. There is no telling young people anything they do not want to hear. They comforted themselves on the way home, saying, if anyone can do this thing, it is Gilgamesh and his friend, the wild man. Ninsun, the king's mother, sent for Enkidu. Remember to dig a well every evening, Enkidu, and offer up pure water to the sun god every day. Oh, look after him, Enkidu. You are not my son. I did not give birth to you. But bring Gilgamesh safe home, and I shall adopt you as my own. I'm relying on you, Enkidu. The wild man bowed his head. For the first time, he realized that there was someone else in the world who loved Gilgamesh as much as he did. What a way it was to the land of the cedar forests! Even though the friends walked 50 leagues a day and accomplished in 3 days what it would take others 6 weeks to do, they still had 7 mountains to cross before they stood at the forest gate. Carved in a dozen languages were warnings and prohibitions. Do not enter. Cut no trees on pain of death. This forest is protected by Huwawa, terror of the earth. And yet the woodlands beyond the gate were as greenly peaceful as the bottom of a lake. Bird song rippled outwards from it in twinkling wavelets. Enkidu shoved open the gate. His knees sagged. His head spun. His hands prickled as though stabbed by 1,000 splinters. He jumped awkwardly backwards. Gilgamesh, don't go in there! The magic is too strong. The moment I touched the gate, my strength failed me. But Gilgamesh was already whistling his way along the broad green pathways of the wood. In the center of the forest stood a green mountain, a perfect cone rising up so high that its peak was hidden by cloud. Its peaceful slopes seemed a perfect place to sleep. Without even troubling to dig a well and refill their water skins, the friends stretched out on the ground. Still, they slept hand in hand so as to wake one another at the first sign of danger. At midnight, Enkidu woke to the feeling of his knuckles being crushed together. Gilgamesh was sitting bolt upright, his eyes glistening in the dark. I had a dream, he said. I dreamt the top of the mountain melted and the earth spewed out its blood, fire and molten rock, and so much smoke and ash that the sun turned black. What does it mean? Enkidu laughed and extricated his hand. It means we've come to the land of volcanoes, friend, he said. In this part of the world, the mountains erupt like spots on a young man's cheek. What else did you dream? I dreamt that the earth trembled under me and clouds and dust flew up so that I couldn't breathe, couldn't see, and everything around me caught fire like kindling. What kind of portent is that for the gods to send me? What does it mean? Again, Enkidu laughed. It means we are in the land of earthquakes. Do you know nothing? The world's skin is like the skin of a lizard. Now and then the scales twitch and the earth shakes. What else did you dream? I dreamt a bull, said Gilgamesh, his teeth chattering at the memory of it. Not just a bull, I mean. A giant of a bull. Bigger than 20 bulls. It was head down and charging right at you. And there was nothing I could do. Nothing. Enkidu scratched his head. Huwawa is nothing like a bull, he said, puzzled. His face is like a lion, and he has fangs like a dragon. I don't know why you should dream a Gilgamesh? But Gilgamesh had fallen asleep, his head on Enkidu's shoulder. When daylight came, he was still sound asleep. Enkidu touched him. Enkidu shook him. Enkidu took hold of him by the ears and banged his head on the ground, but he would not wake up. He was under the influence of Huwawa's magic. The whole day came and went, and still Gilgamesh slept. Enkidu was panic-stricken. Wake up, he bellowed in his friend's ear. Wake up! Must I tell your mother that I let you die in your sleep? Do you want Huwawa to find you like this? He slapped Gilgamesh. He rolled him down the hill. He held their empty water skins over his friend. Ugh, why had he not heeded Ninsun's advice? Enkidu dug and dug, but found no water. He ran and ran until pebbles flew from under his feet as sparks had from the blacksmith's hammer. At last he heard the soft tinkle of trickling water. Splashing into the stream, he scooped the water skin through the cool, delicious water. Then back he ran and, upending the bag, emptied it in the king's face. At last the dark brown eyes opened. Stretching himself, Gilgamesh picked up his breastplate and put it down. He was perfectly calm. Let us go and meet our enemy. Enkidu kicked aside his bow in disgust. You go if you like, but I'm going back to the city. You have no idea. You don't know what you are up against. Me? I'll go back and tell your mother how brave you are, how heroic, how glorious, how dead. Gilgamesh calmly strung his bow. Don't launch the funeral barge yet. What can go wrong with the two of us side by side? A lot of quotes, fifth graders. Do you really want me to tell you? Said Enkidu. Inside his cedar wood house, the giant Huwawa cocked his giant head on one side and listened. A smile came to his lips, which curled like the bark from a silver birch. He reached out and took down his first cloak of splendor. 6 more hung alongside it, woven out of magic and the fibers of the forest. He opened his door, stuck out his head, and bellowed, Who has come into the forest? Let him die. All the acorns fell from the trees, all the nests of the previous spring. He looked, and as he looked, the beam of his looking scythed down trees. He nodded his head, and malign magic rolled through the forest, bluer and deeper than drifts of bluebells. I'm imagining sort of like a foggy blue magic spreading from Huwawa all through the forest. Then he stepped out of doors. The green forest was like grass around his feet. He blotted out the sun. So he's so big that the trees are like grass to him. Gilgamesh, caught in the coal-black shadow, looked up. Oh, Enkidu, he said. He had never thought anything could be so big. Then Shamash the sun looked down and saw Gilgamesh and his friend like 2 tiny ants in the path of an elephant stampede. The sun breathed in, fetching the warm winds. He reached out to see and grasped the north wind and the water spouts, lightning and phosphorescent fire. He turned about and about, and the elements were twisted into a single whiplash, its thongs sharp with hail and sleet. But the guardian only ran back into his house and grabbed his second cloak. He had been formed to protect the forests, and even the master of those forests could not call him to heel. Gilgamesh was wielding his axe now, hacking at the outermost wall of the lodge to bring it down. 7 walls, one inside another, and inside the 7th, the guardian, bellowing flame and destruction. Huwawa put on the 3rd of his 7 cloaks. But with every passing moment, more of the winds of heaven piled up around the cedarwood lodge. They turned back Huwawa's powers like a mirror turns back light. The guardian put on the 4th of his 7 cloaks, and the walls of his lodge bowed outwards. So great was the magic within. Huwawa put on the 5th and 6th of his 7 cloaks, and for 20,000 leagues the cedar forests trembled. At last the 7th cedar wall fell, and Gilgamesh and Enkidu, axes in hand, came face to face with Huwawa. 7 cloaks billowed round him like the rays of a rainbow. Magic shone from his open mouth, from the heels of his hands, from the fabric of his skin. Huwawa might be terrible, but he was also magnificent. Suddenly, a cyclone of twisted wind and heat bound him round. He was powerless to strike the heroes dead. "Let me go, Gilgamesh," he said. "Spare me, and I shall be your slave, and cut down the trees myself to build you a fitting place." Gilgamesh hesitated. He glanced sideways at Enkidu. "Don't listen to him," urged Enkidu. "It's a trick. Kill him." But Gilgamesh swung back his axe over one shoulder. "But Enkidu, if we kill him, all that glory will be lost to the world forever." "Don't let him fool you, Gilgamesh." He was not at all sure how long those ropes of wind binding Huwawa's arms would hold him, how long before the giant would squirm free. It took 3 blows to dispatch the guardian of the forests. He sprawled on his face, the trees falling flat for acres around. The phosphorescent glory which had hung about Huwawa went out like a blown candle. He was a mound of vegetable matter, a hummock in the landscape, dead. Gilgamesh, walking the length of the guardian's dead body, felt the spark of life flare up inside his own. He had survived. He was alive, even more alive than before. All the colors of the forest were more bright, the bird song sweeter, the smells more delectable. The touch of his friend's hand on his arm made him dizzy with joy. They found the tallest cedar tree in the entire forest and hacked it down. It fell with a deafening hiss of leaves. From this, the carpenters of Uruk would fashion a mighty gate to the city. Then, in reverence to the sun, Gilgamesh washed himself in the river, put on clean robes, and made an offering of cold water to Shamash, holding up the silver bowl while the noonday heat drank it up in steamy white sips. And looking down, Ishtar, goddess of love, saw the finest sight the world had to offer. A young man covered in glory, triumphant, silhouetted against the sinking sun, a silver bowl upraised, face shining with pent up happiness. King Gilgamesh. All right, 5th graders, again, as you're answering these questions, yeah, use your book. You can look for the answers. Anything you wrote down, you can use. Listening to the video again is great, and also reading on your own. So you've now heard me read, and that would also be great practice if you have time today to go back and read this chapter again on your own. Good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.